us now. All right, here we go. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jing Yo, and this is the Town Hall on Housing Development. Before we jump in, I'd like to turn over to David Martin, who Community Development Director, just to start with a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to just give a little bit of background of how we got here. So with the adoption of the housing element and the implementation ordinances that have been adopted by council in the last several months, we know there's a lot of questions about what's being proposed and what's planned in the city in terms of housing. So there's been a lot of questions coming from the community, and our city council acknowledges that and directed us to hold this workshop in order to try to explain what's happened so far, how some of the overlapping ordinances and regulations coming from the state are interacting to create what some see, rightfully so, as really bigger projects than we've been used to in the city, and also really projects that are being approved with a process really very different than what we're used to. I mean, over the years, there's been a lot of public review of projects, and our community is used to seeing things go to the planning commission and then sometimes even be appealed to city council. And with the new ordinances and regulations coming from the state, that process has really changed. So again, we understand why there's questions. We want to help answer those questions as much as we can, and that's really why we're here tonight. And then, as I'm sure Jing will talk more about later, there's also a follow-up meeting on November 8th from 7 to 9, and that's an in-person meeting in the city council chambers. That will contain the exact same materials we're presenting tonight, but it will be a chance for people to come in person if they'd rather do that. So with that, I will turn it over. We have our team of planners led by Jing, and then we also have a representative from the city attorney's office here tonight. So I will hand it over to the experts and let them explain the process. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, David. So we have a brief PowerPoint to share with everybody. I would note that this is based on materials you've actually posted onto the website already in terms of explaining the relationship between the Affordable Housing Production Program and State Density Bonus Law. So if you do, feel like you want to go back and reference anything, know that these materials are posted to the website, and this presentation will be also put up on the website as well for easy reference. So with that, I'm going to hopefully, and excuse us if we have a few technical glitches. It's our first time using this platform. So we're just sort of figuring things out here. Here we go. Okay. So before we jump right in, wanted to just go over a few housekeeping items, one of which is how to participate in the town hall. We really desire this to be interactive. So if you would like to ask questions, there is a Q&A option, and you can see it's in the top right-hand corner of your screen. It looks like a little question mark bubble. Please go ahead and click on that bubble, and it's going to bring up a purple box at the bottom, and you can see kind of it zoomed in there. It says ask a question. If you type on that ask a question box, it's going to bring up a little comment box that you can type your questions into. We're going to leave the Q&A to the end. There's going to be plenty of time to do that. But as we go along here, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the box. When we go into the Q&A portion of this, you'll also have the option to call into the meeting to speak your question. So, if you don't want to type it in the box, or you'd like to repeat what you typed there, there's the phone number, 310-883-7522, with a conference ID of 371-084-430, followed by pound. You don't have to remember this number. We will have this slide up again at the end. With the Q&A portion, again, give you an opportunity to call in your question and have a back and forth with us here. And just a reminder that when you do call in, to please mute your online. If you're following the meeting online and you're calling in, there is a broadcast delay. We don't want it to be confusing, so just remember to do that.
Just to say that you also had a dial-in option, and so I've done that without having access to Teams, but we don't have any visual. So just aware that people that are calling in do not have the visual and do not have that opportunity to do the Q&A, to ask the question in that way.
Okay, yeah, we will be unmuting, so we're able to see people that have called in, like a list of phone numbers. So we're going to be methodically going through the phone numbers and unmuting people one by one, so we don't have people talking over each other, and then introducing people into the meeting for that. So you don't have to have the visual ask the question. We will make space for that for whoever has called in. That's how we're going to be dealing that, okay? So the purpose of tonight's meeting, as David said, it was at Council's direction to conduct this town hall to explain the relationship between the city's affordable housing production program and state density bonus law. And we will explain what those two programs are and how they work together, and more importantly, how they result in some of the current proposals that you're seeing for larger housing projects in the city. Before we get into that, it's important to understand some background context in terms of how much the state has really reached down into local zoning matters, such that there really is very little discretion with respect to the city's local control on housing development. We have a certified housing element, the sixth cycle housing element, that was certified by the state on October 14th of last year. And then, as mandated by the certified housing element, the council adopted zoning changes to be consistent with that certified housing element, and that occurred this past spring in March, in April, and then it became effective in June. So we are now operating under these new zoning changes that effectively resulted in upzoning a lot of the commercial areas in the city to support housing. We have had prior discussions with council about these programs and the processes in terms of how the AHPP works and state density bonus law. Those occurred throughout the 2 to 3 year process of preparing the housing element. So let's start first with the Affordable Housing Production Program, otherwise known as the AHPP. And this is the City of Santa Monica local program. It was established in 1998. And it requires the developers of market rate housing in the city to provide a certain percentage of their housing units as affordable units. And they're required to be deed restricted. What that means is that there is an agreement that the housing developer signs to commit to have a certain percentage or number of units in that market rate housing project are required to be limited in what the rent can be, and the occupants also have to income qualify for those affordable units. The other option that developers have is to pay an in lieu fee. And in the housing element, the city has committed to maintaining the affordable housing production program. So when does the AHPP apply? It applies when there's the construction of 2 or more dwelling units, excluding accessory dwelling units, otherwise known as ADUs, and junior ADUs. And what does the AHPP require? You can see in this table here that it depends on the number of units in the project. If it's a 2 to 5 unit project, those kinds of projects, their minimum requirement is to pay the affordable housing fee. And in projects that provide, however, projects of that scale that provide an affordable housing unit in accordance with state density bonus law are not required to pay the affordable housing fee. For projects that are 6 to 19 units, they have to provide 15% of their units on site as affordable. For up to 80% income households, 80% being equivalent to what you might know as low income. And then 20 units or more, projects of 20 units or more, those also have a 15% affordable unit requirement. However, those units are distributed evenly across the 50% AMI, 80% AMI, and moderate income income categories. For projects of 20 units or more, there is the option of offsite units, and you can see there's an increased requirement to 20% of the projects. So that's an overview of the AHPP and how it works. So that's, essentially the gist of the AHPP is it's the city's program that requires market rate housing to provide a percentage of the units on site as affordable. So the other part of this is state density bonus law. And what state density bonus law is, you can kind of think of it like the state level version of the city's AHPP, except that it includes this provision for developers to receive a density bonus. This state density bonus law, it exists because a lot of cities are not like Santa Monica. They don't have a local affordable housing requirement. You can see there that Santa Monica has had one in place, for the last 25 years. But a lot of cities don't, so state density bonus law functions, essentially like their affordable housing requirement at the local level. But as I indicated, state density bonus law, like its name says, provides developers a density bonus. You'll hear us refer to its short form as SDBL. So if you see that acronym, that's what it stands for, a state density bonus law. Developers receive a bonus in exchange for providing affordable housing units in their project. So it's a bit of like an incentive and then a reward system. Is how it functions. And they receive that bonus in the form of more market rate housing units. So can state density bonus law development, can those bonuses exceed a city's general plan and zoning? And the answer is yes. Yes, the projects that receive a state density bonus, they are often larger than what you see as the maximum in the city's general plan and zoning. And that's something that state law requires. It requires that the density bonus be granted, even if it goes beyond the city's general plan and zoning maximum limits. What kinds of projects are eligible for state density bonus law? So in order to use state density bonus law, a project has to answer yes to all of the following. It has to have at least 5 base units, and we'll explain this notion of a base project versus a bonus project in a moment. So 5 base units before state density bonus is applied. Secondly, the project has to meet state density bonus law's replacement requirements. So under state law, it requires that, if just for example, this is not all the conditions, but for example, if there was existing rent control units, on the property, they would need to be replaced under state density bonus law. And then thirdly, does the project provide on-site affordable units for at least 55 years? The city's AHPP already has this requirement. So, when we talk a bit about how these work together, by complying with the city's AHPP, essentially housing projects qualify for the benefits under state density bonus law. What other benefits does a developer receive from state density bonus law? So in addition to a development bonus, they can receive something called incentives, concessions, or waivers. And what that means is those are relief from the city zoning standards or land use rules, as the case may be. So there could be modifications of both standards and allowable land uses under these additional incentives, concessions, or waivers. And requests for incentives, concessions, and waivers can only be denied under very limited circumstances as determined under state law. So what is an incentive or concession? An incentive or concession allows modifications to local zoning standards in order to reduce the cost of providing the on-site affordable unit. So it's important for an applicant to demonstrate, sort of how those incentives and concessions would reduce the cost of providing the on-site units. How many incentives and concessions can they request? Could be up to 4, depending on the percentage of affordable units provided in the project. And some examples of incentive or concession might be additional floor area or a different land use mix in a project. On the other side, there's something called waivers. So there's density bonus, there's incentives or concessions, and then there's waivers. So what's a waiver? A waiver allows modifications to local zoning standards if an applicant can demonstrate that the application of the local standard would physically preclude the construction of the project, including any bonus units in it. And in this case, before we were talking about incentives or concessions as a limit of 4. In this case, developers can request an unlimited number of waivers. An example of a waiver is additional building height. So a question is, can an incentive or waiver, incentive concession or waiver, can those be denied? Yes, they can be, but state density bonus law and recent legal decisions govern how this works. So for incentives and concessions, the city, it is the city's responsibility to demonstrate that the incentive or concession would not result in cost reductions. And the city can request reasonable documentation from an applicant, but we do have very, very limited ability to require the information that's submitted by an applicant to support their request. So, you know, we're not able to require everyone to produce the same thing, and we'll show you in a moment kind of examples, you know, an example of kind of how these incentives and concessions or waivers are requested. For waivers, the city cannot deny a waiver if the development standard would prevent the construction of a project, including any state density bonus units and requested incentives or concessions. So again, as confirmed by recent legal decisions and guidance from the State Department of Housing and Community Development, the legal standard is very high and it's difficult to demonstrate. You know, so that's why the answer to the question is like, yes, technically, but there's a lot of arms around the manner in which, you know, the city could potentially deny. And it's, again, you know, the standard is very high and it is very difficult for the city to demonstrate that these incentives or concessions or waivers are not needed. So here's an example of the kinds of, just, you know, this is just one way that applicants have been making the request for an incentive or concession or a waiver. This one happens to be a request for elimination of what we call the daylight plane. So it's kind of like a transition standard, you know, between commercial and residential zoning. Effectively, it's like a 45-degree envelope, you know, from the rear part of a building, essentially to allow a building to sort of angle back within that 45-degree envelope. And this is one that we receive fairly commonly for housing projects. And you can see here, you know, we'll often receive kind of like a text description of the request. And then there'll be a diagram, you know, showing like, here is, you can see this red line here. Here is the daylight plane angle. That's the envelope that the zoning code requires the building to be in. But the applicant is demonstrating that, you know, this is their project, and these red boxes here are the density bonus units that will be lost if they comply with that daylight plane. And so this is a way to demonstrate that, hey, if we don't get this, waiver, you know, it means that it means that that standard is physically precluding the construction of this housing project, including the bonus units. So we wanted to kind of show this as an example of, you know, one of the ways we've seen applicants demonstrate, you know, why they're asking for that waiver. And again, as I mentioned, the legal standard is very high. You know, it is very much incumbent on the city to demonstrate, you know, why this isn't needed. But this is, you know, the kinds of diagrams that we receive. This is certainly not the only way to show, you know, why the waiver is needed, but we thought this would be a helpful example to see, you know, what we receive. So how much bonus can a housing project receive? So state density bonus law requires the city to grant a density bonus based on the percentage of on-site affordable units. This table here you see is actually taken straight from state density bonus law. This is a table, and you can see, the percentage of on-site very low income units ranges from 5% to 15% in a project, and the corresponding density bonus. So as an example, we were saying the city's AHPP requires 15% affordable units on site. And so in this case, the city would be required to grant up to a 50% density bonus as the applicant requests. And similarly, if an applicant, provided less than that, they wouldn't meet the city's minimum requirements. But if you were a city that didn't have an AHPP, then they might choose some of these other options and receive the corresponding density bonus in the table. So how is the density bonus calculated? The bonus is calculated from the base density of the project. What does base density mean? Base density is the maximum allowable density that's allowed under the zoning ordinance. So essentially, how many units can you fit in a building is the simplest way to put that. And that is before state density bonus is added. The percentage of required on-site affordable units, so the AHPP requirement, is calculated on the base density and not the total project, including those bonus units. So there's going to be this notion of a base project, and you're going to add the bonus units for the total project that you actually see. The affordable housing requirement is calculated only on the base project, and that is something that state law requires. So now we're moving on to the last part of the presentation, which is you can see then how AHPP and state density bonus law actually work together. So you can see here that by providing the on-site affordable units as required by the city's AHPP, so by providing that 15% on-site market rate housing projects in Santa Monica, all receive up to a 50% density bonus. So a developer doesn't have to use all of that bonus, but they have the option to use up to 50%. So that's required by state law. And then they may also request up to 3 incentives or concessions, and also unlimited waivers. So the last slide we have here actually is a graphic representation of how all this works together, and hopefully this is helpful. So we're going to use a theoretical example of a 100-unit project. So this is the base project. I have a piece of land in the city, and the zoning says I can fit 100 units on that property, and that's what's allowed by local standards. Then we're going to add the affordable unit requirement. So the on-site affordable units, and in Santa Monica, it's 15%. Is on-site as affordable, so that's the 15 units of those 100 units are required to be affordable. And then you add on the bonus units. So as we talked about, when you comply with the AHPP with that 15%, that gives you a 50% density bonus. So you can get 50 more units. So you can see in this case, this project now has 150 units. And as a housing developer, they need all the space to fit those 50 bonus units. And so that's where the incentives and concessions or waivers come in to apply to accommodate those bonus units. So for example, a developer could ask for more building height. They could ask for more floor area. And this kind of, I think, demonstrates, some of the questions we're getting of, why are these housing projects, seemingly larger than the zoning ordinance? In many cases they are. This is how you get there. It's a combination of the base project and then the affordable housing requirement, which then leads to the 50% bonus. And I think another common question we get is, why does it seem like there's so few affordable units in the project relative to the total? And you can see here that although this project is definitely meeting the 15% required by the AHPP, it effectively is 10% affordable, in the end, but that's not how it's calculated, because state law requires that affordable housing requirement be calculated only on the base project. So it's calculated on that 100 units, not the 150 units. So hopefully this diagram kind of best explains how the AHPP and state density bonus work together to result in the scale of housing projects, that we're seeing at the moment. And that brings us, ready to the conclusion of our presentation. There are online resources on the City of Santa Monica's Planning Resources page. You can see the URL there. It's santamonica.gov/planning-resources. There is a guide to the AHPP and a density bonus guide that's in significantly more detail than I've gone into here. And we've also posted this onto the Housing Element website, tonight's presentation, and a sort of like cover memo to those two existing guides. There's also a link here to the technical assistance letters from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. As you heard me say in the presentation, a lot of this is driven a lot by state law and also from technical assistance, that we receive from HCD. I would note that, any member of the public can contact HCD if you have questions kind of about how this stuff works. They're a public agency just like we are. And anyone should feel free to contact HCD if there's sort of questions and concerns about the application of state law as well. So with that, we will move into our question and answer. And I'm going to put up here the phone number to dial in if you'd like to speak your question. And how this is going to work is Carrie's going to be moderating the Q&A first. So I think we're going to run through any questions that have been typed into the event Q&A, and then we'll probably go back and forth between that and people who have called in. Please do not unmute yourself and start speaking until Carrie calls on you. He's going to sort of go through the list and unmute people and identify people by their last 4 digits of their phone number and invite you to speak during the meeting. Again, the phone number, if you want to call in your question, have a conversation about this, 310-883-7522, conference ID 371-084-430#. So with that, Carrie, can you take us away through the Q&A, please?
Yeah, thank you, Jean. So starting from the top, the first question that came in was, why has extremely low AMI been removed? It is not enough to start at 50% AMI.
So the extremely low AMI was, it was a decision of the City Council to remove that option from the AHPP, and I'm trying to remember when that was. Must have been maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I want to say. And part of the reasoning was, oh, look, it looks like it was about 4 years ago, actually. And I think part of this is trying to remember, at the time in the AHPP, the extremely low income option, it was a different requirement that you see now. So under the updated AHPP, we currently require a 15% on-site, but under the old AHPP, it was more like a menu. So with extremely low income units, there was just 5% required, and what we were seeing was housing projects with only extremely low income, and it was a lot fewer percentage of units. So instead of 15% that we require now, we were just getting 5% on site, and it was a relatively small amount of affordable units relative to the amount of market rate units. So from a policy perspective, we were getting a lot of units at that income level and also not enough overall affordable units relative to the percentage of market rate units that were being proposed. The other part is also the RENA doesn't have an extremely low income category.
Okay, so the next question is, will this presentation be posted to the Planning Division website? I can take that really quick. So following this call, we will post the presentation along with the recording from the call, and that will be available on the Housing Element website. The next question was a repeat How can the city of Santa Monica forego the offsite option?
The offsite option, I don't think we do. We do have tonight's presentation, we were asked to kind of explain the relationship between the AHPP and state density bonus law. State density bonus law does not doesn't come into effect. So you do not get a density bonus if you provide affordable units offsite. The city's AHPP does have an offsite option. I think if that is the question.
Let me just add to that, Jane. So a developer can choose the offsite option. They would just have to provide a higher percentage of offsite affordable units. So it would be 20%. But the city, I don't think we can deny someone from choosing the offsite option.
That's right, yeah.
Following question, I think this may have been in reference to discussing the bonuses and incentives and concessions. The question was just, is this a specific building? So I think the reply would be that, this really applies to housing projects citywide.
That's right.
Following that, how does it equate to 15% when the charter states 30% annually? This is in reference to affordable housing.
Right, and it sounds like this question may be someone who read the materials that were provided before the meeting. So the AHPP is a partial implementation of something called Proposition R, which was approved by the Santa Monica voters in 1990, and it requires that no less than 30% of all newly constructed multi-unit housing in the city each year be permanently affordable to and occupied by low and moderate income households. The 30% requirement is not calculated on a project by project basis. The way that the 30% requirement has been met sort of traditionally in the past, it's been a mixture of percentage of affordable units and market rate projects, and also affordable, like 100% affordable housing projects that are funded through the city's housing trust fund or through other means. Increasingly, we have seen partnerships between market rate developers and affordable housing providers to fund 100% affordable housing projects that didn't involve city dollars at all. But that's how the city has reached those Proposition R goals historically.
And the next question, state law allows density bonus up to 200% if you provide enough affordable housing. How can you explain the affordable requirements when exceeding the 50% density bonus?
I don't think that there's a 200% bonus. We'll have to look that up. I'm not sure. Well, I think we'll have to come back to that question. I'm not aware of a 200% bonus, but unless this question is about 100% affordable housing projects, which have unlimited density. So it's possible that might be what that's referencing, but I'm not sure. But there's definitely no 200% housing bonus for market rate projects.
Does the city have a minimum square footage for affordable housing units?
Yes, there is. And maybe we'll come back to that question while I just look that up.
I could pull that up. I can
cool,
actually give you the answer. Yeah. So for a studio, it's 500 square feet. 1 bedroom, it's 600. 2 bedroom, it's 850 square feet. 3 bedroom is 1,020 square feet. And for 4 bedrooms, it's 1,200 square feet. So those are the requirements for affordable housing units. And that is in chapter 9.64 of our municipal code.
Thanks, Rachel.
Question, how many people are on this town hall? Currently, we have 44 attendees. The goal is to lower housing costs, but a third of the new construction remains empty due to high rental costs. Do you have a count of empty units? How do you plan to get their units filled? Or is this not the goal?
So I don't think we have information immediately, in terms of how many vacant units are in the city. We have data from when we prepared the housing element, and we probably could look that up if it's been updated since then, in terms of the vacancy rate. But, in terms of the units, that are constructed, the obligation really is for the city to plan and to demonstrate that there's enough zone capacity for the housing targets that have been set by the state. But it's not, whether the units are filled, is not a factor in determining whether a project complies with code. And the vacancy rates are, not something that's taken into account in the review of projects, I guess I'll say.
And the following question, this is more site specific. 1444 7th Street is 0.34 acres and 1654 19th Street is 0.18 acres. What is the max units for these sites?
We will come back to that one. I think that's a very specific question. I think we'll have to do a little bit of research, and we will respond, I think, in the chat for that one.
Rachel's saying that there's some sound issue on my end.
Yeah,
Rachel,
why don't I yes,
okay.
I will go ahead and take over. I'm hoping everybody could hear me clearly on this. So the next question has to do with a specific project, a couple specific projects. They're asking about 1444 7th Street, 0.34 acres, and 1654 19th Street, 0.18 acres, and the number of max units.
Yeah, that was what I was just talking about. I think we're just going to have to maybe we'll look that up, and we will respond in a chat. We'll come back to that one, because we're going to have to do just a little bit of research and math on that one. I'm not even sure if those are pending projects or not.
Okay, and then the next one, just a general comment, it should be a mix of income starting at extremely low. So this is also another project specific question. SMART, which is the Smart Architects, has written specifically about how Lincoln Center is out of compliance. Will the city address these concerns?
Yeah, that's actually, so that's the project that is, I assume the one they're talking about at Ocean Park and Lincoln. And I think if I can just use the slides here just to illustrate, although it is, potentially it's out of compliance, it's been through a couple rounds of code compliance review. And we do get this question a lot, hey, this project looks like it doesn't comply. And you can see here in this diagram, part of, a big part of tonight is explaining, why we're seeing housing projects that are, number one, bigger than zoning or general plan, and why they are built to standards that don't seem to comply with the code. And this really explains how that occurs. Number one is that they likely have a density bonus, and then secondly, they have requests for incentives, concessions, or waivers. What we check for a lot is to ensure that we identify what aspects of a project are not code compliant. And then we work with applicants to make sure that they have submitted appropriate requests under state density bonus law, if they're using state density bonus law, to request waivers or incentives or concessions. Basically we asked for kind of showing the proof, if you will, right, on whatever requests they are making for modifications to the zoning ordinance, and making sure that that request has been received as part of the project application.
Okay. Next question is, there is actually it's more of a comment. There is a new 100% bonus for mixed income with a mixture of very low and moderate income that goes into effect next year. And Jing, I think this is referencing the new state law, which I think just passed last month.
Yeah, and we're still catching up to that. I appreciate the comment. I think we're aware of it, and yeah, we're kind of still catching up to everything that the legislature passed this session.
Okay, and the next question is, are Airbnbs still outlawed? Has anyone been cited? How many?
So yes, Airbnb in its traditional sense is known as short-term rental, and it is prohibited in Santa Monica. What we do allow in the city is something called home sharing, which is that the primary resident or the owner of the site has to be on site when a guest is on site. So that's the only way that people can offer short-term rentals, or Airbnb-like listings in Santa Monica. Obviously, have a license and what have you. And our code enforcement division is very active in citing any illegal short-term rentals in the city.
Okay, next question. Please give the full list of available incentives and concessions. You only give one example in this presentation. Also, please explain how city planning negotiates this process with the developer and what kind of options we have.
Okay, that's a great. Let me see if, sorry, I'm just looking up. So for incentives and concessions, there isn't like a defined list of standards. Basically, anything in the zoning ordinance, could be requested by a developer for an incentive or concession. And I'll go back to the slide to review, right? The standard that it's reviewed under. Sorry, let me just go back to here. So what is an incentive or concession? It's modifications to local zoning standards. So it's any zoning standard. The city can't say, hey, you can only choose from these 6. What we do have in the zoning ordinance with the updates is there is a list of incentives and concessions that a developer could request without going through the kind of documentation process, and those are sort of like on a menu, but it is not the only things that could be requested, and just examples of that. And these are in non-residential zones. They include, sorry, I'm looking it up. So includes, building height, minimum ground floor height, private outdoor living area, residential parking requirements, long-term residential bike parking, additional floor area, unit mix. Those are examples of potential incentives and concessions, but that's not exhaustive. Again, developers can request, a modification to any zoning standard. And you can see here that, in order, they just have to show that it, would reduce the cost of providing the on-site affordable unit. And the other part of it was explain how planning negotiates this process with developers. So it is not, I wouldn't call it a negotiation. It is a request for incentives and concessions or waivers. And I think this slide here explains, again, can it be denied? Can the city deny an incentive or concession or waiver? And it is, yes, technically. However, there are, again, a lot of restrictions around this. The legal standard is very high, and it is difficult. It is difficult for the city to demonstrate that the incentive or concession would not result in cost reductions. That bar is high, and this is again, the state reaching into local control. And you can see for waivers, the city cannot deny a waiver. We just can't deny a waiver if the development standard would prevent the construction of a project, including any state density bonus. So you remember that example I showed, the diagram of the building, right? Showing that, hey, if this daylight plane was in place, the housing developer is saying, I would lose X number of units, right? If they're showing a diagram like that, the city really can't deny that waiver, if it's physically precluding the construction of that project, including the bonus. So It's not, it's really not a negotiation. It's, has the developer followed the procedures under state density bonus law to make these requests, and the city is required to grant the bonus. And you can see here that it's very much on the city to demonstrate that the incentive or concession would not result in cost reductions. And again, under state law and recent legal decisions, it's a very high standard to cross.
Okay. Thanks, Jing. Next question is very project specific again regarding two sites, 1444 7th Street and 1654 19th Street. Again, I think if you have any specific project questions, I think if you just send us an email about this, probably better, as this is a very specific questions about what can be built on the site and whether or not it meets city goals. Next question is, does this mean that if a developer complies with the state guidelines, that the city has no way to stop an 8-story building that is leveraging the 50% bonus?
I mean, that's a kind of broad and question, but essentially, I think taking the sort of numbers out of it, if a developer complies with those state guidelines, I mean, effectively, yes, the city has to grant that bonus. It is not a choice for us to say, no, you cannot have this bonus. And, again, here you can see this slide, right? Can it be denied? The bar is very high, so it's a sort of yes, but, and there's very the sort of discretion, from the city to say no to these incentives and concessions or waivers. We just really don't have a lot of leeway in this sort of a situation.
Right. Next question is a repeat question. I'm just going to repeat it just in case people didn't hear Carrie the last time. It was how many people are in this meeting. We had about 44. Right now it's at 43. And again, we'll be posting this PowerPoint presentation and video online as well on our Housing Element webpage. Another question, I'm not really sure what this is referring to. Why isn't it taking into account? Not sure what that isn't referring to. Next question. I am distressed at the density of the Gelson's project at Lincoln and Ocean Park. 521 units are planned, no 3-bedroom and only a few 2-bedroom units. This would do little to improve the need for affordable family housing. In addition, assuming 1,000 people will live on the site, that's density of 132,000 people per square mile, over 10 times the density, the 11,000 density of Santa Monica. How can this jet density be justified?
Yeah, that's another great question. And, we hear you, we hear the concern, this, the concern about, how can this be justified? Boy, that sure seems a lot of units. And, I think what we're trying to explain tonight is that a lot of this is out of the city's control. The state has reached into local control. This is not just, it's not just Santa Monica, it's every city in California, is experiencing this and, is kind of, wrapping our arms around this process. And all of this is in response to a declared housing crisis declared at the state level. And the call to action by the state through sticks and carrots, for cities to kind of do their part in addressing the housing crisis. And what that has translated to is incentives for housing production. So what we're trying to explain tonight is how these projects, why they look bigger than what you may have been used to for gosh, the last 30 to 50 years. This is different. This feels different because it is different. So we absolutely hear you on that. And what we're really trying to explain is just how to explain the mechanics behind it, and how this works together to to why you see the housing projects you do.
Okay. Next question is a repeat question about the full list of available incentives and concessions. I think you've gone over that. That might have just been a delay in publishing the question. This next question, the 50% density bonus apparently ties to 15% very low income of the base number. How does that change if the developer is delivering the 15% evenly distributed between VLI, LI, and moderate per the AHPP?
Okay, that's a great question, and I'm just going to decode some of that a little bit, just so the question here relates to we'll go back to the slide in here, so we can just go back to the 15%. So the table, okay, so state density bonus law. Sorry, I don't mean to go so fast here. So you can see under state density bonus law, 15% very low income units gets you a 50% density bonus. And the city's AHPP breaks up that 15% to distribute that evenly across, effectively what you would know as very low income, and moderate income. So there's 3 categories. So it's like 5%, 5%, 5%. And the city actually received technical guidance from State Department of Housing and Community Development, so from HCD, in terms of whether that 5%, 5%, 5% would, how that impacts the density bonus that a housing project receives. And we were told by the state that, we need to treat these the same. So basically, instead of looking at it from breaking it down from an income level, it was just consider that if a project provides 15% on site, that we need to offer an equivalent, 50% density bonus as if they were doing very low income units on site. So I hope that answers the question, is that there wouldn't be a difference if they're delivering units that are split across the income levels, or if they were all just very low income. Essentially, I think the state was looking at it from the perspective of, not using, our local AHPP as a way to prevent the use of state density bonus law. It was a way to say, developers are providing 50% affordable, and that the city is getting what it wants, out of having the units split across 3 income levels, and the developer is then rewarded, for providing those 50% affordable units with a 50% density bonus.
Okay, great. I'm going to actually switch over to the people who've called in to give them a chance to. So I'm going to call out the last 4 digits of the phone number. If you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. Otherwise, I will move on to the next caller. So caller ending in 0286, do you have a question for us? Going once, going twice. Okay, moving on to caller ending in 1878. Do you have a question?
And maybe, Rachel, do we want to help unmute that person in case they're not sure how to do it?
Sure, I can see if I can try. Doesn't seem like
Are we able to unmute people? Oh, we don't have that.
I don't have the ability.
Okay. Carrie, do you have the ability? I wasn't sure if you might.
Yeah, let me check.
Again, caller ending in 1878.
Yeah, it's not giving me that permission. I think they may need to.
All right. Well, we will then. I'll try to do. I'll just try to go back one more time at the end. Caller ending in 8868. Do you want to unmute yourself and let us know if you have a question? Going once, going twice. Okay. Caller ending in 8909. Do you have a question? If you don't, you could also just let us know you don't have a question. Caller ending in 3037, do you have a question? Okay, next caller 2252. Do you have a question? Hello?
Oh,
yes, I
we
do
go.
have a question. The main question is, I have seen many of the developers between Community Corporation and many of the other companies that are actually developing from the ground up. It seems as though there is a strong elimination of no 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. If these developing companies are coming in and they're asking permission through City Hall, zoning and permits, why is it not stipulated to have a certain number of units prepared for actual families?
Oh, and I think your question is in the context of affordable housing projects that are potentially like funded through the city's housing trust fund, it sounds like.
A combination.
Right. Yeah. You know, I don't know the specifics of how that works. I am aware that in a lot of those projects, they do tend to have, you know, a percentage of them as family units, if not all of them. They tend to be maybe 2, 3 bedrooms. Like that's usually how we get kind of like family size affordable units. In terms of 4-bedroom units, that might be a little more unusual. And it may have to be, you know, something to do with the cost of those units and the need to get more units within a certain envelope. It is a challenge to finance affordable housing, you know, through public dollars because there's kind of, you know, limits on kind of construction costs, and you know, they can only go so large, and there's limited funding available, you know, so that can be oftentimes a limit to the mix of units, and also to be competitive, you know, for funding as well. Those are sort of the very general reasons.
Okay.
You know.
Well, part B to that question was, because we have well over 3,000 students here at Santa Monica High School, there's not enough housing legacy-wise for these kids when they grow up and they go to SMC or UCLA for them to remain in the city of Santa Monica.
Caller 2252, do you have a question?
Do you want to unmute your online? Yeah, there's a bit of that broadcast delay, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. 2252, you could continue speaking, or are you done?
Thank you. So the part B of that was, because we have well over 3,000 students that attend Santa Monica High School. Many of the families have been vested for several years, and even though the families are expanding, we want to allow for our 12th graders to not only graduate and go to SMC, but as well as UCLA. We want them to be able to remain in the city of Santa Monica. So with only 1, 2 bedrooms being developed between low income, affordable, and also luxury buildings, there should be stipulations in which all properties that are being developed, they have to include 3 and 4 bedrooms, be it low income, affordable, and or luxury.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I think we all share that goal. You know, it's trying to, I think, unlock, you know, the right mix of regulations and incentives, like, you know, to get family size units, because you're right, you know, people eventually just get priced out. You know, Santa Monica is one of the most expensive cities in the entire country to live in. We have zip codes in Santa Monica that are among the most expensive in the entire United States. And part of that, it's a very desirable place to live. The zoning code does have mix requirements, you know, for a minimum percentage of types of units. But, you know, what we're explaining here tonight is that if a project uses state density bonus law, unit mix is one of those standards that can be waived. You know, and this is one of the things that is frustrating, you know, as a local government, you know, is just the lessening amount of control, you know, we have over these housing developments. And so, you know, we we are being put in a position, where, a lot of it is trying to find the right incentives,
Correct.
for housing developers to build larger units in a way that, makes financial sense. I mean, that's really the directive from the state, is that because there has been, such a shortage in production just across the state, the focus is very much on production of units, all kinds, of just units, and there's not necessarily a focus on, the kinds of units that you might be talking about, right? Maybe at some point there will be, but that has not been the focus. It's really just been on production, and then certainly it's not that we don't see larger units, we do, but it's often the case where, if it pencils out, I think I always say, like, if it made sense and it made money, then people would do it, and that's kind of where we're at, with respect to these sorts of housing developments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Jing, I'm just gonna go back through. In order to unmute yourself, if you're calling on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. I'm gonna go back through some of the phone numbers because I realize some people may not have been able to unmute themselves and there might be a delay. So I'm gonna go back through some of the numbers to see if these callers have questions. Caller ending in 0286. If you will have a question, press *6 and unmute yourself. Hello, do you have a question?
I hear something. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Jing. Good to see you, Jack Walzer, and good to see
Hi.
David as well. Jing, would you please review the different AMIs for that are applicable to the 15%?
Yes, absolutely.
By providing the 15%. You went to it pretty quick. And,
yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So here you can see on this slide. Oh, is that your question, or did you want to complete that?
No, that's my question, just to review that again.
Absolutely. So you can see this slide here. It depends on basically the number of units proposed in the project. So this is the city's HPP. If you're doing 20 units or more, the minimum percentage is 15% affordable units on site, with the even distribution across 50% AMI, 80% AMI, and moderate income. So that's the 5% at 50% AMI, 5% at 80% AMI, and 5% moderate income. If it's a 6 to 19 unit project, it's 15% affordable on-site as well. However, in that case, those kinds of projects, their requirement is that there's not the even distribution across all the income levels. It can be all at 80% income, 80% AMI or lower. So that's kind of how that works. Does that answer your question?
If I'm still on, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so unit projects larger than 80 units. Trying to read it and okay. I'm larger than 20 units. Across the board, all the units have to be 80% or less.
That's right.
The gradation of 555 goes away.
If it's below 20 units, right?
Oh, if it's below 20
if it's
units.
Below,
if it's
yeah.
above 20 units.
If it's above, 20 units or more, then it's the 15% on-site distributed evenly between 50%, 80%, and moderate income.
And moderate. What is moderate have a percentage on it?
It's 120%.
120. Okay. Is that a part? Of course, I'll research it, but I assume that's in the state density bonus guidelines.
This is from the city's affordable housing production program.
It's Santa Monica specific.
This is Santa Monica specific. Yeah, that even distribution. So the reason for the reason it was distributed this way is because our housing allocation, as mandated in the housing element, has targets across all income levels. It's not just 80%. We have targets at 50%, targets at 80%, and targets at moderate. that we have to plan for. So this was a way to ensure that we get affordable units at those different income levels.
Got it. That's why it threw me a curveball. I didn't realize it was Santa Monica specific. Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go through the next batch of callers as well. Again, to unmute yourself, press *6. If you have any questions, callers, I'm going to go in groups of 2. I'm just seeing as how there's a delay. Callers ending in 5635 or 1878. Five, 635, 1878 callers. If you have any questions, *6 to unmute yourself. Three, 2, 1. Hearing none. Callers ending in 8868, 8909. If you have any questions, *6 to unmute yourself. Again, callers ending in 8868 or ending in 8909. Okay, hearing none. Callers ending in 3037 and 5122. Okay, I don't think I hear any more caller questions, so I'm going to switch back to our Q&A through the web. Next question, let's see here, where did we leave off? So if the city were to increase its HPP inclusionary requirements, would that at least ensure that a greater percentage of the units would be affordable to qualifying low and moderate income families? So I think the caller is asking if instead of 15%, we required, let's say 20%, would it ensure that there would be more units available to low and moderate income families?
I mean, the question is if we increase the minimum affordable requirement, would we have more? I mean, in theory, if you increase the affordable percentage, you would have more affordable units. However, the question of raising our HPP requirements above 15% isn't, kind of a simple thing to do. If the city wanted to increase our HPP program above 15%, it would authorize HCD to review our HPP program for economic feasibility. And generally, they seem to consider that.
This is 5635. *6 to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. We're going to come back to you in a moment. 5635, just hold. Don't. I'm going to come back to you just after I finish answering this question. So in terms of if we required more than 15% affordable for 80% or less AMI, the state considers that as a likely impairing the economic feasibility for new housing development. So, in terms of increasing it, again, it would be subject to the state reviewing it and determining that it wasn't an economic feasibility issue.
And 5122.
Jay, I think we've finally got some callers due to delay issues.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let me go back to, I believe it's 5635.
Yes. Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, we
I can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I just muted the other screen. In Santa Monica, we're hearing a lot of people that feel that there's a lot of development that's out of character with the city and so on now. And just comparing with Pasadena, where it seems like projects get built there are more sympathetic to what people want. And I don't know how familiar you are with Pasadena there, but more in terms of style and scale and so on. And I'm just wondering, I'm just fully comprehending everything you're describing, but I'm just wondering if the city attempts at all to kind of partner with developers, I mean, if they're proposing something very aggressive, you know, such as the doubling in height of many of these projects that we're seeing now along Santa Monica Boulevard and particularly Wilshire Boulevard, you know, that previously were proposed at 4 stories and suddenly they're 8 stories. Is there any attempt to kind of, you know, partner or reach out with the developers and say, this is not going to be received well here? Would you consider some concessions? Or do you, yeah, so the question is that, do you attempt to present what residents are feeling in the city?
Yeah, I mean, we do, you know, we do work with applicants, but again, I do want to be clear that, you know, the review process is not one where the city has leverage to require it, if that makes sense. You know, we do on a daily basis, you know, we do meet with applicants and, you know, ask like, hey, you know, what do you think about making this change? I mean, we talk with applicants about design all the time, you know, when we review plans, but the review process really is one of code compliance. And if an applicant does not want to enact that change, they don't have to. You know, this is not an area where, again, you know, we have a lot of authority to require the change. You know, because the review process really is such that we review it for code compliance. You know, we have a certain number of days to do that. You know, the applicant is given a set of comments, and then oftentimes if something you know, is not compliant, right, they have the right under state density bonus law to request incentives and concessions or waivers for modification of those standards, you know, if they follow the procedures under state density bonus law. So, you know, it's not a case that, you know, we get a lot of authority, you know, to you know, control the size or the shape of a project. It's not that we don't try, you know, but just so you understand, you know, it's not something that we can require.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fully understand that. I know that Santa Monica has a reputation of being difficult with approvals, and I'm just thinking, you know, at a certain point, a developer is just so kind of annoyed that they just, you know, try to get anything through, that they'll just push it through because they really don't care, because the city doesn't respond very well. The city doesn't. You know, it isn't kind of being a partner with the developers. That there's that sort of a mindset. I'm just wondering how Pasadena, just to take this example I'm somewhat familiar with, is able to, you know, get development that's really quite kind of simpatico with the, you know, scale and character of the place, and we seem to be failing at it.
I mean, I can't speak to, you know, which part of Pasadena or what have you. I think that, you know, there is a design review process that Santa Monica's had for a very long time, you know, that reviews projects. And, you know, we're in a moment where, you know, we are trying to ensure that we have regulations that incentivize, you know, housing developers to design projects, you know, that meet the code as much as possible. You know, but the fact is, you know, they do have the ability to waive or modify those requirements. And you know, I think your question is, you know, do we sort of work with developers, you know, to try and you know, help shape a project? And you know, like I said, we do. But you know, if it doesn't work for their project, you know, they have every right, you know, to certainly modify them. And I think, you know, what you see in Pasadena may be, you know, from years past, right? You know, these standards have just gone into effect as of June. It's only been 4 months. You know, we haven't had projects that have been built under these new standards yet. You know, so it kind of remains to be seen, I think, as to, you know, how they will turn out relative to the proposals that are before us.
Sure. I just to kind of prioritize there, then I think what is particularly alarming is the kind of overshadowing, over existing building fabric that is going to come from these 8 stories, where they're adjacent to 1 and 2 story, and to sort of appeal to you to the extent that you can to try to get developers to follow those those overshadowing rules. You described that earlier, where they may not need to if they can show that by violating the terms they're accommodating those bonus affordable units. But I mean that is a particular concern, I think, to not have projects do more damage than they have to, and overshadow and impact existing neighbors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, one of the strategies that we try to keep consistent with the general plan was to ensure that if there was going to be upzoning, that it was limited to the commercial areas of the city, of which there's not that much of it relative to the entire land area of Santa Monica is only 8 square miles, and over about a third of it is actually single family neighborhoods, and then the sort of like other another third or so, if not more, is our residential neighborhoods. And for very good reason, the city has aimed to protect those residential neighborhoods, right? That's where all of our existing rent control units are located. A lot of this was like, if there's going to be a need to plan for all of this new housing and upzoning, it wasn't at the cost of displacing existing tenants. So it's a trade-off for sure. In terms of all of our commercial boulevards back up onto residential neighborhoods. That's just the way the city is laid out. So there are going to be larger buildings next to residential neighborhoods, but it is a trade-off of not upzoning and really preserving those residential neighborhoods, because if that pressure isn't there, we had to the housing element, the state required the city to demonstrate that we could accommodate these thousands of new units, and the zoning had to be reflected in that in terms of upzoning. And so the upzoning occurred in the commercial neighborhoods, or in the commercial zones, excuse me. And the compounding effect of that plus state density bonus law, means there will be larger buildings, in those commercial zones as a trade-off to preserving residential neighborhoods. But I think your comment, your observation is very well taken.
Okay, I'm going to, I believe we might have heard one more caller ending in 1878. There is a 20-second delay. As a reminder, if you're calling in. So if you are calling in 187, caller 1878, go ahead and mute yourself with *6, and I'll give you some time to unmute. Okay, maybe we could take a next question, and if caller 1878 can just unmute themselves whenever they're ready, we'll try to get to you next. Okay, so the next question that we had, let me get back to this, was still confused about Lincoln Center. So is Santa Monica stating that they don't care if these huge new buildings are Lincoln are occupied? If the goal is to reduce homelessness, isn't the fact that 1/3 of them are empty an indication that this isn't working?
Right. So, I think we've touched on this a bit in a prior response. Just I think help thinking about this in the context of the state's declared housing crisis and the mandates on cities to plan for, these housing targets. It doesn't really, the issue of whether units are occupied or not is not something that is taken into account, in the state's estimation, of the mandate to plan for housing. I think these units are being proposed, and a lot of it is, the city is not, we are not a developer of housing units. Our role here is, really to be in compliance with state law and to plan and to provide the kind of regulatory environment, and consistent with the certified housing element. If housing providers, didn't think this was economically feasible, they probably wouldn't be proposing the units here. And the issue of whether the units are occupied or not, isn't something that's factored into these mandates at the moment. And I don't think it's a case of us not caring, that these projects are being proposed or what have you. It's just, the fact is that, this issue of local control, is increasingly being eaten away. And, it's the city's responsibility to comply with those state mandates.
Right. Okay, next question, similar lines. Was this credible source for this wild claim that 30% of new housing is empty? I think that's just in response to another commenter about the 30%, whether or not that's accurate. Next question is along the same lines about instituting. If the units continue to remain empty, is there a plan to institute a tax for property owners for those empty units to promote reasonable pricing of units so that they don't remain empty, or something to actually fill those units, since of course that should be the goal of density housing?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, some cities have instituted a vacancy tax to kind of like bring, I think the idea there is to, bring vacant units back on the market, or if people have, buying second homes or vacation homes and keeping them out of the rental market. So, that certainly is a tool that some cities have used. I don't think that's not something that sort of is, seems to be on the radar for Santa Monica, but, that certainly could be something that the council, city council may ask or direct us to investigate at some point. But it's not something that we've looked at the moment without that direction. But it is a tool that some cities have used for sure.
All right. Next question. We have heard that other cities have been fighting these state guidelines. Is it possible at this point to object to the guidelines, or is it too late given the council has adopted them? And I think, Jane, you've already said HCD has already given a lot of guidance on this.
Yeah. These state, I think just as context, we're not really aware of any successful challenge to HCD's guidelines. So it's not, I think the guidelines this is referring to is it like the housing, is it the RENA potentially, or, these sort of mandates in totality, I think. And if that's the case, there's not been really any successful challenge, to HCD's direction on these issues.
Right, and to add to that, Jane, the last slide has a link to all the HCD technical assistant letters where they have provided some legal counsel to cities about incentive concessions and waivers and what cities are required to do in those cases. All those letters are available online, and so I think as
you can see the link. Link
right
here, and these all come from there's something called the Housing Accountability Unit within HCD that provides these technical assistance letter to cities, and they receive complaints and requests for technical assistance on any issue affecting housing production. And anyone's free to look at these letters to see kind of the the kinds of direction that we receive.
And most of the direction have been on the lines of pro-housing, isn't that correct, Jing?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay, next question. A little bit of a repeat about the vacancy tax. So I'm going to skip over that one. If the city were to approve more stringent zoning regulations in terms of such things as floor area ratios and building height, wouldn't that reduce the base count and effectively limit the final count after accounting for the density bonus provisions? So
Yeah.
this would be the lower zoning that we used to have.
Right. So I think two things there. Number one is that as part of the 6-cycle housing element process, the reason that we saw an upzoning across all of our commercial zones was that the city had to demonstrate through its zoning regulations that the kind of land area, right, that was identified for housing potential could accommodate those thousands of units. And to the extent our zoning standards were too low to accommodate those thousands of units, they had to increase, and we had to also prove to the state that those standards could feasibly, like economically, support housing production. So that's why that upzoning happened. Secondly, there is a law called Senate Bill 330, which is the Housing Crisis Act, and what that law has many provisions, but one of the things that it has in there is that it prevents cities from downzoning below standards that were in effect as of, I think it's like January 2018. I think hope I'm not making that up. But it sort of locked in a moment in time that the city couldn't downzone below, so that it effectively prevents any downzoning. And so those two things work together to prevent the city from artificially like lowering development standards, to reduce that base project, because it's not something, again, that we could, that the housing element process wasn't something that we could just do on our own in a vacuum. It had to go through the full vetting process of the state, and so that's what resulted is you had to demonstrate that the standards that were adopted were feasible and would support housing production. So it's not that we wasn't considered or thought about, but that just wasn't, it was not something that would be allowed.
Right. I'm going to give these next two questions to Ross. Can a developer include an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, in a mixed-use project, and when is that allowed?
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, ultimately, ADUs are allowed in certain circumstances in mixed-use projects. Specifically, in 2020, ADU state law expanded to allow ADUs in multi-unit dwellings in 2 ways, and you're allowed to actually do both of these ways in one project. The first way is you can construct up to 2 new detached ADUs on the parcel. In Santa Monica, we consider detached for them to be at least 6 feet away from any primary dwelling unit. And then the second option is you can convert up to 25, you can convert existing non-habitable space up to 25% of the existing unit count. So for example, if you had 4 units on site, you could convert, let's say, a garage space to 1 ADU. So both of those options are available within the multi-unit dwellings, whether they're either proposed or existing.
Great. Next question, has the city implemented an SB 9 ordinance?
Yes, we have. So part of the first phase 1 of the implementation of the housing element, we adopted our local SB 9 ordinance, which became effective on June 1st of this year. For those that don't know what SB 9 is, it's ultimately the ability for a single family zoned parcel to be able to produce 4 units up in a combination of either a duplex or through ADUs, but ultimately to get to 4, it also allows them to potentially to split their parcel into 2, but ultimately still limiting them to 4 units combined. Santa Monica did expand upon SB 9 for parcels above 10,000 square feet in size to potentially get it's through, again, the combination of the establishment of duplexes and ADUs. And to my knowledge, we have only had one SB 9 unit actually be approved thus far.
Great. Thanks, Ross. Going back to Jing, this is a question about the, I guess, reference to, I guess, the Housing Accountability Act. Since Santa Monica can't hire enough police for the current population, isn't it enough to challenge the addition of 1,000 residents at the Lincoln Center?
Yeah, so housing projects have pretty strong protections under state law, something called the Housing Accountability Act. Basically removes nearly all discretion from cities to deny a housing project. Again, that's a law that's been in place for decades, I want to say, and it's been strengthened even more in recent years in response to the declared housing crisis, and the basis upon which a city could deny a housing project, again, is very narrow. And recent legal decisions, I think, have continued to support the protections that are afforded housing projects under that law. And this issue of enough police officers for a population, you would have to make a connection that there's a impact on public health and safety. And I believe in the legislation, there's actual language in the legislation that states that that particular provision is like to be used sparingly, or it's very unusual. And it's very clear in both the state law and in recent legal decisions that denying a project or reducing its density is something that is very, very difficult, and it's not a procedure that is like meant to be typical, and it's one of the few state laws, I think, where you see language like that, that this is not a provision to be used like on a regular and routine basis.
Right. Okay, next question. Who approves applicants for the low-income units? Will Santa Monica residents be given priority when the low-income units become available? And is there also consideration given to city employees after residents to apply and be given a higher consideration in order to build our community? If not, is this something that the city council can legally provide direction on if the residents ask for it, and will it be allowed under state law?
Yeah, so all the affordable units that are built to satisfy the requirements of the AHPP, those affordable units, the occupants of those units are selected from the city's below market waiting list. So it's not, applicants are not allowed just to go out there and just find people on their own. It has to come from the city's below market waiting list. So, I think, as I talked about, like the process is such that for those affordable units, applicants are required to sign a 55-year deed restriction, that places income and rent limits on those units for 55 years, and then occupants for those units are chosen from the city's list. So that's how that process occurs. So it goes through a full and transparent vetting process.
And they can, if the residents ask council for direction on prioritizing certain people like city employees after residents, is that possible? under state law?
Those are, yeah, it's not really a state law issue. It's actually like there's written guidelines for administering the AHPP through the housing division. I suppose I guess it's a policy of the city council, but I don't want to misspeak on that. But it is the way that the sort of like priority guidelines for those units are determined through the AHPP's administrative guidelines.
Okay, great. Next question. The housing crisis is real, but building more units without rent control doesn't address the underlying problem. When will medium area rents apply to newer units and not only those units from the 1970s?
Well, the rent control. So rent control in Santa Monica was enacted by the voters in the 70s, and it only reaches back to units that were older than 1970. Is it 74 or 78? I should know this, but we don't have the ability because there's other state laws that are in effect now to apply rent control to units as they come online. There was a state law that enacted kind of like statewide rent control, but it reaches back like units 15 years and older. So, but at this point, without further voter approval, and that would be not just at the local level, but also changing state law to enact that, then we really don't have the ability to bring more units into rent control.
Right. Yeah, basically state law would have to change.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Next question. Has staff been asked to discuss with council the value of fighting the state, joining other cities that are fighting HCD on this removal of local control?
Have we been, I want to say, and maybe the team can help me here because was it discussed at some council meetings maybe earlier in the year?
Yeah, I mean, when the RENA came out, I mean, I think there was a lot of discussion about whether or not we would try to fight back on the RENA, and ultimately, we saw other cities not, moving the needle on this point, and council did not give direction to staff, even though it was discussed to join the fight per se, because it's their view was that it was kind of a losing battle, that they saw other cities not being able to really win over this issue.
Yeah, and I don't think we are aware. There have been instances in the past of cities filing or litigating over like RENA allocations and such, and we're not aware of any of those challenges having been successful.
Right. Okay, next question. Can you point to the HCD guidance letter on the split of the units between the income levels? I think there's a kind of a misunderstanding here that the split of the units is not by HCD guidance. The 15% split between 5, and 5, 5% very low, 5% low income, and 5% moderate is a local AHPP requirement and not an HCD requirement.
And I think you see the link on the screen there for the technical assistance letter. It was the letter that was written to the city of West Hollywood. We'll get a date for you on that in a moment, but that would be responsive to that question. And it was under that letter, state density bonus laws, the category.
Right.
And it was sometime last year. Yeah.
That letter basically said that the city's local affordable housing ordinance should not conflict with state density bonus law or undermine state density bonus law.
Shouldn't undermine it. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they were essentially saying we could not use the 5%, use the split as a way to lower the bonus that an applicant could be granted.
Okay. Next question. If the city can positively demonstrate that the existing infrastructure cannot safely accommodate the density bonus population, does that impact the city's obligation to allow this density bonus?
Not that I'm aware of. We're obligated to grant the bonus. I think if the question is about, whether there'd be, enough, wastewater capacity or what have you, that's a separate issue. If there in fact isn't, enough capacity, the developer is required to upgrade the infrastructure to support that development. So that's not something that can be, they're not absolved of that obligation. That's different than zoning standards when it comes to, upgrading, infrastructure necessary to support development. They're still required to do those sorts of things.
Okay. If the state implemented these housing measures based on a need for affordable housing and housing for the unhoused, why is the state allowing developers to build so much housing that can't be used for these purposes?
Well, I think the assumption there that these housing measures were based on the need for affordable housing, I don't think it was only that. The declared housing crisis is really at all levels. It's not only focused on affordable housing. Although I recognize in this question, that there's, I think, a recognition that there's certainly an affordability problem, but the state has, I think, chosen to tackle this from the perspective of producing as many housing units and supporting the production of as many housing units as possible. I will note that in the certified housing element, it's not just a focus on market rate housing. There are also required programs in there that do require support for special needs housing targeted towards people who are formerly unhoused, people who are experiencing homelessness. So that is the kind of other programs in the housing element address issues like that. We were required, for example, to plan for both transitional supportive housing, demonstrate that there is also zone capacity for those kinds of projects. And in fact, the zoning rules allow those uses, like permit them outright without any public hearing. So that's how the state mandates address the need on that end of the scale. And just to return back to that West Hollywood letter, we were talking about the date is September 2nd, 2022, if folks want to search in HCD's database for that.
Okay. Next question. I think we've already gone over the 15% requirement for HPP. If you want to just maybe keep that slide up, Jing, for people's purposes.
Sure.
With all this new building, can Santa Monica afford to open the libraries again? If not, why not?
That's sort of a broader, I think, question around budgeting and whether the library is open again. That's really a matter of council's decisions on the budget. That's, I think, kind of independent of new development and housing projects that we see in the pipeline.
We already addressed why is the city not suing the state. We talked about the legal difficulties in that. The next question, building more 100% affordable housing units is continuing to violate fair housing laws by segregating people and pushing them into certain types of housing. The Biden administration is against this, is encouraging cities to build more inclusionary units. Why is the city of Santa Monica not following the guidelines regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think the city has had a long history of the production of 100% affordable housing. In this 6 cycle housing element, there was a new requirement to address affirmatively furthering fair housing. And that was the first time that it's been applied to housing elements across the state. So it's brand new in its application to housing elements, but we had to demonstrate in the housing element that the housing element programs, the upzoning, all of the new standards and the allocation of housing, didn't disproportionately, impact, one part of the city versus the other. And, we had to go through a pretty extensive process to demonstrate that. There are, and, what I think the result of that is, while our housing element demonstrated that there may have been, concentrations of affordable housing in certain areas of the city, namely kind of around Pico neighborhood. The plan in the housing element is to open up other areas of the city, that formerly may not have accommodated as much affordable housing or even just, housing potential as other areas. So, for example, on the north side of the city, on Wilshire Boulevard, and areas of the city that were shown through census data to be, affluent areas, areas with, that higher income, more homogeneous. We went through that sort of analysis with HCD, and, they definitely required, the city to demonstrate that, every part of the city was sort of taking its equal share, if you will. And, the AHPP in and of itself, by requiring the on-site option, effectively, has that sort of integrated housing of both market rate and affordable. And, the way that we cite 100% affordable housing is also, something that's different going forward. I think, the housing element identifies a handful of city-owned sites, that are not just concentrated in the middle of the city. So, for example, there's some surface parking lots off of Wilshire Boulevard. There's parking lots that have been identified on Main Street, areas that have traditionally not seen, as much affordable housing. Those are commitments by the city to offer those properties up for affordable housing as a way to also demonstrate compliance with that affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement.
Right, and the requirement too is that 100% affordable housing cannot be located in the Pico neighborhood. That's also something new that came out of the housing element to ensure that there wasn't an overconcentration of affordable housing in the Pico area.
Thanks.
Next question has to do with about getting larger family units built. Again, as Jing had mentioned, we do have a unit mix requirement in our code. However, what we've seen lately is that developers can't, incentive, concession, or waive themselves out of these unit mix requirements and effectively not build as many 2 or 3 bedrooms. And that's a state density bonus, again, law where they are allowed to waive that requirement. Next question, the chart ends without considering a 100% affordable housing project. Good point, and Jing can explain that. What is the maximum number of studio, senior, or student or early career center worker housing units? I'm assuming they're referring to what is the maximum they could get in a 100% affordable housing project.
So, yeah, with a 100% affordable housing project, well, this chart was really meant to demonstrate the requirements for market rate housing projects. For 100% affordable housing projects, by definition, comply with the AHPV because all of the units are affordable and they're deed restricted as such. Under state density bonus law, those sorts of projects have no limits on density, and they could get up to an extra 3 stories or 33 feet and an unlimited, up to 4 incentives and concessions. And they can also request waivers. The city did opt into, by allowing the waivers to apply to 100% affordable projects that have unlimited density. We do allow those sorts of projects to request waivers, but they cannot be located in the PICO neighborhood. So that was a small amount of discretion that the city had in applying state density bonus law.
I'm trying to kind of clump some questions together since we are hitting our 2-hour mark. Next question. How many buildings have been built to meet the number required? I think they're referring to the arena. Haven't we met the quota? How many have been built and how many more are left?
Rachel, you might be in the best
Yeah.
position, actually. I mean, I think the
yeah,
to answer that
I could
question.
I could take a stab at answering this
Yeah.
question. In terms of our market rate, there is enough in the pipeline so that we are, doing fairly well. I think we're not in the red zone in terms of our market rate. In terms of our affordable, I think we still have a little ways to go. I can't tell you the exact numbers, but considering that 70% of our 8,000 RENA number was affordable, we still have quite a ways to go. And, so I think I would say we're pretty much, we still got thousands at least.
And I guess I would note that every year the city has to report to the state how many permits have been issued for housing. That's done every April through something called the annual progress reports. We also have the housing dashboard, which is on the housing element website. So santamonica.gov /housing-element-update. There's a link to a housing dashboard there that is updated with how the city's doing. But like I said, you can certainly go to HCD's website or just Google like annual progress report. They put on there also a dashboard, kind of every city across the state of California. And it's kind of an interactive dashboard there that you can boil down to see how Santa Monica is doing as well, based on the most recent annual progress report that was submitted.
Next question is, who decided what areas were upzoned and how do we have an impact on that?
So ultimately, it was the council that approved the upzoning this past spring, and that was based on to be consistent with the housing element. The areas that were upzoned, as I indicated, were these commercial areas, and that was the trade-off, was that it was, this extensive 2 to 3 year process to get the housing element certified. It was a public process before the Planning Commission, the City Council, the community was involved. There was a public engagement process in that, but a lot of it was also driven by state requirements, on the rules around how the city demonstrate that there's enough zone capacity to accommodate these housing targets. And, as I indicated, in order to ensure that, we didn't unduly impact residential neighborhoods and, displace existing tenants, a lot of the focus was on these commercial areas of the city. And then, it wasn't just focused on only, like, let's say the downtown. Part of that affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement was to ensure that upzoning occurred, somewhat equally across the city. So, areas that we'd never looked at before, like Montana Avenue and Main Street and Ocean Park Boulevard and, Wilshire, those areas that, maybe haven't supported as much housing in the past, were pulled into the process.
And Jane, I just want to correct something I said earlier. I misspoke. And 100% affordable housing projects are allowed in the PICO area. It's the offsite that is not allowed.
Right.
I'm
Right.
sorry, I misspoke on that.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is, does the ARB continue to have authority over design?
Absolutely, they do. The design review process is not going away. What has changed is that the design review hearings going forward will occur before a determination on an application is given. So historically, the land use approval was given. So, someone got approval for a project and then design review would happen. Going forward with these new generation of projects, design review will occur before the land use approval. The idea is to kind of front load that design review process, more, and give us more opportunity to shape the project. But the ARB continues to have the design review, discretion that they've always had.
All right. You already answered this question about whether or not housing was upzoned on Montana. It was. Next question. Did council approve condominium ownership of ADUs per the provision of new state law?
Yeah, this is in reference to Assembly Bill 1033. So at the last council meeting, I think that was October 24th, I believe, the council gave direction to return with an ordinance to implement that new state law that would allow the potential sale of ADUs. So that was direction council gave, and staff will be returning to council to follow that direction at some future date.
Great. Next question, once a project is permitted, within what time frame must construction begin before the developer would need to reapply?
Yeah, this question is about something, technical term is called exercise of rights. So once a project gets its land use approval, they usually have, it's like 2 years to obtain their building permits before they would need to, well, before that approval expires. If they're in the coastal zone, they get another 6 months to do that. It is possible for those projects to receive an extension, but generally it's that initial period is 2 years before the approval expires.
Next question, the presentation, actually you have the slide up, that showed that 15% of the units in a project had to be for very low income units, but the HPP requires that 15% affordable units for projects 20 units or greater be spread evenly between different AMIs. Does meeting the minimum HPP requirement for 20 or more units also meet the 50% state density bonus law requirement?
Yes, it does.
Right. So if you're providing the 15% spread evenly, then you get the 50% density bonus.
That's right.
Next question. This is a repeat. Exactly how many more units do you need to meet the state requirement? Again, we refer you to the city's housing progress dashboard, which is on the Santa Monica Planning Resources page. And we could put that slide up. Maybe Jan,
Yeah,
that way they can link to it. If they scroll down, there should be a link to the housing dashboard on the planning resources page, and they could track basically all the pending projects and all the completed projects that have been submitted, all the pending ones improved. So is the plan, next question is, so is the plan for the Main Street parking lots to be 8-story developments, or what is the city's vision?
So that is, there is not a plan in place per se. That is one of the sites. There were 1, 2, 3, like 5 city-owned sites that were identified in the housing element, and please correct me if I'm misspeaking there. So one was the surface parking lots off Wilshire Boulevard. One was almost 5 acre or 3 acres on kind of like the former 4th and Arizona site. So between 4th and 5th on just south of Arizona, there's like a surface parking lot and a bank building. That site there was one. The Bergamot Arts Center was identified as a potential possibility, and then these surface parking lots on Main Street, and then where the former parking structure 3 in downtown was. So what is planned for these sites is that there needs to be a public process through the city council. They would need to go through a formal RFP process for to invite applications from affordable housing developer partners. The commitments in the housing element are essentially that these city-owned sites are used to address what's called they called it a shortfall, but basically that we committed the city-owned sites to accommodate roughly 1,800 affordable housing units. But, in terms of, what development might occur on there, how many units, that would need to go through a public process with the city council. So there isn't anything kind of a vision or what have you in place for that other than the commitments in the housing element and its future implementation. But the commitment is for those units and to issue RFPs, to invite partners to develop affordable housing on city-owned sites.
Right, and along those lines, someone had asked if the city were to lease the property for $1 for the 100% affordable housing project, or would we be able to, so that to help the city make the affordable housing work?
That's right.
Right. And that would be a council direction again, or a council decision. Next, regarding YIMBY meaning yes in my backyard legislation, will the city also implement this? Jane, I think this is pretty broad question. We have to implement any enacted.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah, it's not a choice for the city to not be in compliance with state law. So to the extent that state law is taken into effect, it's been signed by the governor, and it's effective, we are required to comply with state law.
Yes.
And obviously follow council's direction in that regard.
Right. I actually think we might be at the end of all the questions. There's some comments, nothing that really warrants any kind of questions, but I'm gonna give it a couple more up as I see one pop up. So that 1,800 affordable units that is required is only 15% of 50% of built units. I'm not sure what the 1,800 is referring to affordable units that the city is committed to building on city-owned property. So the 1,800, yeah. So the 1,800 is not any density bonus. This is what the city is committing to building on our city-owned properties.
Right.
And of lower income.
Of lower income, yeah. And that was part of the commitment in the housing element.
Correct.
Rachel, do we want to do one last check of the callers to make sure that we didn't miss anybody?
Right. Okay, let me
I don't remember
that.
Who. Yeah.
Okay, so I got only a few, I guess a handful of callers. 0286 5635, callers ending in 0286 5635. If you have any more questions, unmute yourself with *6. And while we're waiting for them, I'm going to call out the next two callers, 1878, callers ending in 1878 and 8868. Be prepared to unmute yourself as well with *6. Okay, I see someone leaving. Okay, callers 8909 or 2252. If you have any more questions, *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, and then one more 5122. Okay, I'm gonna go switch back to the Q&A because I think we have one more question. How is it that? Sorry, go ahead.
Someone.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for having this town hall meeting. It was very informative, and thank you for the speakers. And I really appreciate the time that you've invested and the time that you've given us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you participating.
Thank you.
Okay, and then one more question. I think this is a reference to the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Why is it that Manhattan Beach has less than 1,000 requirement, Culver City is just 3,000, and we have 9,000 for the RHNA targets?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm having to reach back in my memory on kind of the formation of the RHNA, but it went through an extensive process. I think I'll just generally describe that the state allocated, a number of units to our region, which is known as the Southern California Association of Governments, otherwise known as SCAG. And includes, Los Angeles County all the way to Riverside County, Orange County, so it's a huge number of cities. And then SCAG went through a very public and extensive process that involved all cities in terms of then allocating that big number into individual allocations to all cities. And it wasn't just take a number and divide it by all the cities. It was very much taking into account, where the jobs are, proximity to transit, and then this, you heard me mention this affirmatively furthering fair housing aspect. So sort of an equity piece, that was added to this of, where are the jobs, where is that transit proximity, where are people commuting from, and so what essentially happened is that cities near the coast, on the western end of the SCAG region, got higher allocations than, let's say, San Bernardino or the Coachella Valley or what have you, just as a way to implement, more, smart planning practices, right? Having housing be closer to where the job centers are and where transit is located. So, that's generally speaking. And then the numbers that meted out within cities, landed kind of where they are. And Santa Monica got its allocation, of 9,000. So a fair comment, among other cities in terms of, why they got 3,000 or 1,000 or what have you. The fact is, that Santa Monica is, in that sort of very big picture regional view, is considered jobs rich, transit rich, affluent, so we checked all of the boxes in terms of receiving a higher allocation perhaps than other cities. I think that's maybe the sort of broadest way to explain that process.
Yeah, and it was a different process this year as compared to past cycles. So yeah, again, you did a great job explaining it, Jing. Next, we do have a couple more straggling questions. I'm going to try to see if we could get these answered quickly. Where on the city website can we find the larger projects? Again, Jing, if you want to scroll to that last slide, everything can be linked from our planning resources page. We do post approved housing projects online. There is if you go down to public resources on that website, recently approved streamlined housing projects, you click on that and those show a listing of housing projects. You can also click on the housing progress dashboard, which tracks all of the projects that are pending and have submitted an application. And last question, did you say there was a 10,000 square foot lot threshold for Santa Monica SB9 lot split provision? Please clarify. Bras, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So yes, there is a 10,000 square foot lot threshold, but that is for only when SB9 can be utilized to get greater than 4 units. If you are under 10,000 square feet, you can very much still use SB9, but you'd be limited to only 4 units through a combination of duplexes or ADUs.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I just wanted to show folks the planning resources website since we just referenced it, and it's got a wealth of information on it, including links to the guides that we talked about today. And I think, there's a page on builders remedy projects as well that people might be interested in. And there's a link to the housing dashboard. So please check out this page. It's got a lot of links to, I think, a lot of the information that people are looking for that's been mentioned on the town hall today.
Great. And again, all of this information and the website and PowerPoint will be posted on that as well.
That's right.
Okay, I think that is all.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for your participation in tonight's town hall. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out personally to me, any of the planning staff. You know, my name's Jing Yo. I'm the planning manager. We're absolutely here to answer your questions. And we will be holding an in-person version of this with the same content next week. It's next week, right? No, November the 8th, which is Wednesday, 7 to 9 p.m. in the council chamber. So if you know anyone who missed out, we will be holding the exact same event except in person. So please feel free to attend. Again, thank you so much and have a lovely evening.